my big regrets when it comes to my coverage of video games is my enabling of the anti-woke community. Because these are people that I superficially agree with on certain topics, and it felt like we should support each other to a certain extent, right? Even if we disagree on some things, right? Fundamentally, we are on the same side. Or that's what I thought at the time. And unfortunately, over the past several years, all of these people, whether it's Clownfish TV or Raging Golden Eagle or that guy with the lolly avatar with the glasses, like, you just, no, absolutely not. These are disgusting human beings who have disgusting takes, who are mostly primarily interested in grifting and getting clicks and making money, right? They're not actually interested in talking about the real issue. And I think this extends all the way up to the leader of Gamergate 2, Grummz, who has no understanding of the industry, no understanding of the issues, and most importantly, he has no ability to make good games whatsoever, which is why he's so obsessed with covering anti-woke topics, right? Grummz is a complete joke. And I have said this over and over and over again for the past several months, but for me personally, like, it feels like I'm not going far enough. I'm not like looking at every single one of his tweets. I'm not commenting on everything. I'm not debunking all of his statements as they come out. And it's so frustrating because for me, like, this is something that I think I really should have done a better job covering. It's like with the Ricada thing, right? When I first started condemning Ricada in like 2019 for how he was handling the Vic Mignogna situation. Like, you do, it was a gradual thing. When really I should have come out like a lot harder and been a lot more aggressive in calling this guy out on his nonsense. But yeah, again, my mistake, right? Genuine mistake. What does this have to do with what's happening now? Right now, the anti-woke community is doing this obnoxious thing where they're pretending that Square Enix failing is because of DEI practices and their attempts at going woke, right? So Grummz, Clownfish TV, like a bunch of these people have come out and said that Square Enix is failing because of censorship. They're failing because of pandering to the West. Well, that's kind of true, but we'll get to that in a bit. They're pandering because of woke culture. That's the narrative. But that is so far from reality that it's not even really worth talking about, right? Square Enix has been alienating their core audience for decades, right? Because of their refusal to put out anything that's not Final Fantasy, because of their refusal to produce high-budget turn-based RPGs, because of their refusal to support Nintendo platforms, right? Square Enix has been a disaster for a very, 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 very long time. But it's only relatively recently that this knowledge has become somewhat mainstream. Because, back in the 2000s, and especially back in the 90s, like, people really thought that Square Enix was like some top-tier developer that had made all the right decisions and was killing it. They were producing all these bangers like Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, right? For the masses, the idea, like, Square leaving Nintendo to support PlayStation was the obvious go-to move, and that paid off for them really well. But in actuality, their success at that point was built up entirely based on their output from the Super Nintendo era. When they made the jump to PlayStation, they immediately started firing people. They started making poor decisions, producing that movie, and producing Final Fantasy VIII, which sucks, right? They even back then, it was the beginning of modern Square Enix. They were, and they demonstrated this over and over and over again, completely incapable of making a game on the level of quality as Final Fantasy VI, because they simply just lost sight of what was really important and how to develop a good, interesting video game. Right. And this has nothing to do with woke culture. This has nothing to do with like modern sensibilities or the West. Like, it has everything to do with the fact that Square Enix, like every other video game company in Japan and worldwide, like every other video game company, turned its back on Nintendo and tried undermining them by supporting PlayStation and their audience of non-gamers. So this is why Final Fantasy VII was casualized. This is why the series became more and more cinematic, and this is why eventually they started not even being RPGs. This is Square Enix desperately trying to pull in the elusive modern audience of PlayStation playing Call of Duty players who would totally be interested in playing an epic fantasy series of guys with giant swords like fighting each other. Like, Square simply didn't understand their real audience, right? And they still don't respect them. Like, if you see interviews from these people like talking about this kind of thing, they'll laugh at the idea of producing a real Chrono Trigger sequel because, like, oh, like that won't sell. Oh, like they'll try and tell you that like turn-based RPGs are outdated and boring, right? They'll try and tell you that everything they're doing is making them tons of money. Like, you know, they do everything they possibly can to ignore the reality of the situation. Is that because of their creative decisions with Final Fantasy, which at one point was a huge deal in gaming, one of the biggest, one of the most well respected, because of their inability to adapt, Final Fantasy went from one of the most lucrative, popular, iconic video game franchises in the world to being a shell of its former self that even the most hardcore, dedicated fan has turned its back on. Like, we have not gotten a good Final Fantasy game in like over 25 years, right? It's insane to think that something like Final Fantasy X, which is considered a classic now, is was such a polarizing title when it first came out because of the voice acting, because of the story, because of how linear it was, because of the creative decisions they took, right? I mean, whatever you can say about Final Fantasy X, it's better than the stuff we're getting now. And this is the real reason why Grummz and his ilk are so off base when talking about Square Enix because they're not talking about the actual games, right? They're not talking about what Square has been doing for the past 25 years. Like, all they can talk about is like, oh, they produced Forspoken. Oh, that was kind of cringy. Oh, like they're not addressing the real issue. And even up until somewhat recently, or even today, like there are still lower budget titles at Square Enix that are being made that are good. You know, like the original Octopath Traveler was fantastic, right? Well, that was back in 2018, but you know what I mean, right? Like there were good games coming from Square Enix, like relatively recently. So, like, these people don't seem to appreciate or value like the developers that are putting out good things under the publisher. They don't talk about them. They don't know anything about them because they're not gamers. Okay, they don't understand what is actually going on with these companies because they don't engage with the product enough. They don't understand the clear and obvious decline that is pretty self-evident to anyone who's actually spent any amount of time like trying to play through all of it, right? To most fans, Square Enix's decline has been like very self-evident for a very long time now. The issue has always been when and how it started. And that aspect is of course like debatable. You know, I think my take that like it started in the 90s is you know, with Final Fantasy VII. That's kind of extreme, but lots of people uh you know agree like the merger was bad for them and you know Final Fantasy 13 was the beginning of the end. Like again, like it's debatable like when and how it happened, but it did happen. And it really fundamentally at its core has nothing to do with woke culture.